all the people in Rotherham, why me? And what's that got to do with ordination? I got ordained. That's what made me a priest. But I've not been ordained just once. I've been ordained twice. How come? How come? That was, maybe I became a priest, then stopped being a priest and became a priest again. Great thought, but totally wrong.
Took a gap year at McDonald's, did he?
Why do you think ordained twice? Yeah.
Maybe because you travel to a different country.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought, but again, not true. Does it expire? No, you are a priest forever. Is part of a line in the Psalms. You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Who on earth was Melchizedek? That's another question you might want to ask. Why do you think? I failed the first time. Me fail?
Yeah.
Have I ever failed?
Yeah.
Well, I failed mathematical physics. But no, it's because there are 3 levels of priesthood. You might just think, oh, a priest is a priest is a priest. But no, there are 3 levels of priesthood. The priest is the middle one, and there's one below and one above. What's the one above? The highest order of priesthood. What do you think?
The same. The same.
No. You've all met, I think, one of these at least, who is higher in the priesthood than I am. If you can imagine such a thing. What do you think? The bishop. The bishop is the top order of the priesthood. Then come priests. And then the first order of priesthood is somebody called, have you ever heard of the word deacon?
Yeah.
We don't have very many deacons around this area, but I was ordained deacon a year before I was ordained priest. And sometimes these days you can be ordained a deacon and go no further, but for those who are going to be a priest, they need to be a deacon first. So 3 orders of priesthood: deacon, priest, bishop. And I'm not going to get the 3rd one.
Why?
Because I'm too old. Happy. So, ordination as a deacon, then ordination as a priest. The ordination took place in St. Anne's Cathedral in Leeds. Anybody ever been to Leeds? Some of you have been to Leeds. Because Leeds was the place where I was born and brought up. Not Rotherham, not Sheffield, not Barnsley. Leeds. Who had the best football team ever. Who won the FA Cup in 1972. And I was there. Just before I went off for my studies, which took place in a place called Rome. Anybody been to Rome? Either you have or you haven't. I don't think you could make a mistake. Did you go to, have you been to Rome? No? Any of the grown-ups been to Rome?
Unfortunately.
Shame upon you.
Yeah.
Have you been to Rome? Been to Rome?
Trip, sure.
When?
Yeah.
Maybe we should get back on the same. I'm not sure. I think it was a year ago.
You think it was a year ago. What did you see there? Big buildings. Lots of churches.
The Colosseum?
Colosseum.
Was it Mum and Dad's honeymoon?
Next to the Forum. See the Forum? Can you remember anything that you saw?
Was there a beach?
Hope not. Was there a big river running through it?
Might be then.
Anyway. So I did all my training in Rome. But where did the journey actually start? when I was about your age, a little bit older than you are, priests used to come to the school, to the primary school, and talk about their work as a priest, and oftentimes they'd been missioners. They'd been to different parts of the world to spread the gospel, and they came and talked to us about it. Now, in those days, I was in year 6, and I used to go home for lunch. Something none of you ever do you? Nobody pops home for lunch?
No.
But I used to go home from primary school for lunch, and I was telling my mum what we'd done that morning, which included listening to a priest who'd been to Africa, and he was talking about his work in Africa, and she said, "Do you think you'd like to be a priest?" And I said, "Maybe." And that was the beginning of the journey towards priesthood, which would come to a sort of conclusion in St Anne's Cathedral in Leeds in 1978. Oh, 1978. That's ancient history. That's such a long time ago that even Mr. Sharp can't remember it.
I was 5. I think 5 won't take questions in a while.
Yeah, well, we'll have to
Save it in your
So,
head.
I've only ever had one job interview in my life, and that was when I was 15 years old. And this was in Leeds, and I was due to see the Bishop of Leeds. And I thought, in my innocent sort of way, that it'd be the Bishop and me. The Bishop would be sitting on a big chair, because that's what bishops do. And I'd sort of be somewhere at his feet, and he'd take his hands in mine, and he'd say, "John, you've got the job." What actually happened wasn't quite like that. My parents and I went to an old house in the middle of Leeds. Have any of you ever seen horror movies?
I can't watch
Really?
a horror movie and then goes to sleep. Oh, nightmares.
Well, exactly. Well, this was the stuff of nightmares. It was a big old house with sort of, anybody know what a turret is? And in old houses, when you've got lots of turrets, what flies round the turrets? Bats. It was that sort of house. And we went in through a door that went and through the door and into a huge, long, dark room. About 3 times the length of this classroom. And down the middle of this long, dark room, right down the middle, was a very long table. And on one side of the table, there was a row of men in black, all with one of these around their necks. And they were all very, very old. There were 2 bishops, 3 or 4 monsignors, some canons, and the one person I knew because I'd been in his parish, and he was the vocations director, the man who looked after people who wanted to become priests. They were all down one side of this long table, and on the other side of the table was one chair. Guess whose that was for? Me. So I had to walk down this long room and sit on this chair with all these people across from me. I thought I'd come to see the bishop, and he was there, and he said, "Hello, John, I'm just going to see your parents now," and left. And all these monsignors and canons and others fired questions at me, like, how often do you go to church? How often do you say your prayers? What prayers do you say? Why do you want to be a priest anyway? And I had to answer all these questions fired at me. At the end of that session, I got the job. And he never put his hands into mine and said, "Got the job?" I just heard afterwards. And as a consequence, I was sent a few years later to go to Rome to do my studies for the priesthood. Now, when you want to become a priest, You've already done English and maths and science and stuff like that. So you do specialist things, which you've probably never heard of. But happily, Mr. Sharp is an expert in all these things. So he can tell us what philosophy is, because that was one of the things I had to study. Philosophy.
Ethan knows philosophy.
Is that to say Mr. Sharp doesn't?
This is where we
What are
overthink
the
things.
chances? It means the stars in the sky, right?
No, that's astrology.
What are the chances?
But it's got,
If you philosophise, is it where you...
it's philosophy. The word comes from two Greek words, philia and sophia. That tells you all you need to know, doesn't it, Mr. Sharp?
I'm no further forward, I regret to be clear.
Philia is to love something. Philia means love. And Sophia is wisdom. So philosophy is the love of wisdom. So you have to think about how things are and why they are, and how you know things, and the history of philosophy, which stretch back thousands and thousands of years. So 2 years doing that, and then a thing called theology. Anybody know what theology is?
It's like geography, but recent.
Interesting thought. It comes from two Greek words, theos and logos. And that tells you all you need to know. Logos is to do with studying things. It actually means word, but to do with how words come together. And theos is to do with God. So it's words about God. And includes all sorts of things like the Bible and the sacraments and stuff that you've done in RE, but at a bit of a higher level. And I did 5 years of study of theology. And after 6 years of study in all, so I had another one to do because that makes 7 in all, I was ordained priest. Having been ordained deacon, I was ordained a priest. And that ordination involves a number of things. What have you done about ordinations? What can you tell me about ordination? And now I'll tell you that. Answer some of your questions. What do you think?
The boys got to be like the bishop and the people who were getting ordained.
Right.
And we were just singing like Christmas carols and stuff. And we were just like sat as like the audience, like watching them doing like ordinations, learning.
Okay, what happens at an ordination? What are the important parts of an ordination? What actually happens?
I know like one part the bishop puts a hand on your head and you press that,
Right, that's very, very important. Essential to an ordination is prayer and what's called the laying on of hands. So the bishop will put his hands over the candidate's head, actually pressing down. And if I keep this up much longer, you'll be ordained a priest. So prayer and the laying on of hands. But other things also happen in the course of an ordination. Have you heard of... Do you have a question? Are you going to tell me what happens? Oil. Oil is very, very important. Holy oil. Not just oil that you'd use for frying your chips, but holy oil that's been specially blessed. And this, where does the oil go? When you're baptized, you'll be anointed on the crown of your head. When you're confirmed, you're anointed on your forehead. When you're ordained, where does the oil go? Where does the oil go?
Does it go on your hands?
Brilliant. It goes on your hands. So my hands were smeared with the oil of chrism when I was ordained. And then your hands are put together, and later on, the oil is washed off. Or your hands are anointed with the oil of chrism. Chrism is also the oil used in baptism and in confirmation. What does chrism mean? It's very similar to another word, which is a very important word in our religion. Well, we will hang questions at the moment. Chrism is a word which is a bit like Christ. Christ is the anointed one. That's what the word Christ means, the one who is anointed. And in baptism, confirmation, and priesthood, we share in the roles of Jesus himself. Something else happens in an ordination, which I'm sure you would have enacted. What else happens in ordination? We've got a prayer, laying on of hands, anointed with oil, lying on the floor. Why does the person who's been ordained lie on the floor? And does he lie face up or face down?
Face down.
Why, do you think?
It's like,
He'd have a better view if he laid face up.
so it's like we're getting reborn as a priest.
Well, it's sort of, and it's an act of humility, isn't it? If you kneel down, that's being a little bit humble, and if you go fully down, it's a sign of humility as people pray for the person who's going to be ordained priest. So we've got all these elements of the priesthood. We've got laying down, prostrating. We've got anointing with oil on his hands. We've got prayer and hands being put up over his head. And that's all in the context of Mass that you're all familiar with and which has been explained to you many times before. Okay, so all that happened to me on a wet Sunday afternoon in Leeds in July 1978, when Mr. Sharp was how old? I wonder what he was doing that wet Sunday afternoon in Rotherham when I was being ordained in Leeds. But you have some questions?
I'll be flying the Millennium Falcon with the car.
A question?
Where did you go to become a priest?
Well, I did my training in Rome, then I was ordained in Leeds Cathedral, St Anne's, and then went back to Rome to do another year's study, and then came out to work as a priest in Doncaster, was my first place of work. I wasn't forced into it. No, I wanted to become a priest from about the age of 10. I never really changed my mind about that.
Why did you become a priest?
Well, I sort of had this idea that God wanted me to work for him in a particular way of helping his people in the ways that priests do, which is something we might come on to in due time.
What's it like?
What's it like? Well,
You only work one day a week, some days.
don't believe anything Mr. Sharp ever tells you. I'm sure you've learnt that by now. It's something I've always done, and I've done it now for a very, very long time. So I suppose I think of it as just being normal. As to what I do, which is to come into schools and talk to people, say Mass every day, visit the sick, visit the hospitals, and all those sorts of things which you know, it's like, what's like being a teacher, all sorts of things that you do, and when you've done it for a long time, you do it. So, but it has its fun parts to it, certainly. I mean, I'm seldom bored. I'm seldom thinking, oh, what should I do today? Oh, perhaps I'll just put my feet up. Perhaps I'll just watch TV all day. You know, the sort of things Mr. Sharp does every weekend. But I don't often get a chance to do that. Question? You forgot. What?
How long did it take you to
Well, the training was 7 years. 6 plus 1, which is to say I had 6 years, then was ordained, then had a year to finish off my studies, So, normally speaking, for most people, it would be about 6 years. A bit like the same time for becoming a doctor.
Can I ask a little follow-up to that, Father?
Sorry.
If at this age you were wondering what to do, sometimes if you think about going to university, you can be put off by the cost. Is it a genuine question, is it? But is it an expensive process that you need support from your family to be able to?
No, the family are invited to pay if they are able to, but all the costs will be paid for by the diocese.
Right.
So the Diocese of Leeds paid for me to be 7 years training in Rome, and that's a very expensive place to send somebody. But the bishop, when I was in the sixth form, said, if you want to go to Rome, I will send you to Rome. So it was down to my choice. And since I'd studied Latin and ancient history, Rome was a pretty good place to go. Yes? If I wasn't a priest, there's a joke about that. The joke is if an Englishman and a Frenchman are talking, and the Frenchman says, Monsieur, if I was not French, I would love to be English. And the Englishman says, my jolly little chap, if I wasn't English, I'd want to be English. Okay, we didn't get the joke. But if I wasn't a priest, what do I want to be? I want to be a priest. But if the other career I might have thought of would have been teaching, but probably not in a primary school or in a secondary school, but I probably wanted to teach at university. So I would, by now, perhaps be an eminent professor of something. But in fact, I did teach university sort of stuff when I was in South Africa. So in a sense, I'm a teacher as well as being a priest. And my studies in Rome meant that at the end of those studies, the Pope himself allowed me to teach. So it's a papal award, is the degree I have, my master's degree, which allows me to teach theology. So that's the sort of thing I would be doing anyway. Yes?
Did you get any calling for the sensation to become a priest?
Well, I sort of felt that that's what I wanted to do. So that was a sort of call. It wasn't a blinding light. It wasn't an angel appearing to me and saying, John, you should become a priest. It wasn't anything like that. It was just a deep sense inside that that's what I should do. At least I should put myself forward, and then you have to be accepted by a bishop, and then you have to get through the studies successfully. And then ordination follows. Yes?
Have you ever thought about what you do with being a priest, and you think of you at this point you'd rather be a teacher?
Well, at one point in my priesthood, I was asked to teach. So this was in South Africa, and the bishop had established a new seminary. That's the place where priests are trained to become priests. And because I had this degree, which allowed me to teach, I was asked to be responsible for all the studies that took place in that seminary, in that college. So with no training at all in terms of how to teach, I ended up being a teacher, which is more of a lecturer than a teacher. So you're actually talking to people a lot more than actually trying to get them to understand what's going on and do things as you do in your classrooms.
What's your favourite part of being a priest?
So it's what?
What's your favourite part of being a priest?
My favourite part of being a priest is dealing with people at times when they are in need of certain types of help. So one of the things I am a lot involved in is dealing with people who are dying, and then people who have lost somebody because they've died. So taking funerals and things is an opportunity to deal with people when they're going through a very bad time, a time of crisis. And it's not exactly enjoyable, but I hope it's helpful to those people. and helping people is one of the greatest joys you can have in life. If you're actually able to help people positively and get through a time of crisis. So that's one of the things, the good things about priesthood for me.
You know, like you said, everybody wore that thing.
Yep.
What is it?
This is a piece of plastic, and this is a particular type of shirt into which the plastic will go, and this is sort of my uniform. So you have a school uniform, and when you're coming here to school in the morning or going away from school in the evening, people can say, ah, they go to St. Bede's. Well, people seeing this will know that I'm a priest. They won't know what sort of priest I am, because I could be an Anglican priest, or a Catholic priest, or I could be a Methodist minister. But because I'm in black, that's usually a good sign of being a Catholic priest. Priests tend to wear black, and with this collar, though the collar couldn't go all the way around, depends on a question of style, question almost of fashion as to what sort of collar you have. It's basically just a piece of plastic to identify me as a priest, who's not ethically plastic.
How long have you been a priest?
I've been a priest for a very, 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 very long time. How old do you think Mr. Sharp is? If you know how old Mr. Sharp is, and you take away 5, you know how old
I think
You're 50. You're 45 years.
I have been a priest for 45 years. Can you imagine doing the same job for 45 years and still going?
Is there a retirement age?
Priests can retire. If priests are sick, they probably would retire, however old they are, because you need to be reasonably fit to do the job. But at 75, it's generally thought of being a sort of age when people would be allowed to retire. So I've still got a way to go.
Not long.
Thank you very much. You want to get rid of me?
These children were all part of your 70th celebration.
They
if you
were.
Remember? So
They were.
that was about 8 years ago. No, but you know, like the
Just
Pope.
never believe anything Mr. Sharp
The
tells
Pope is expected to die at 60 in his role.
The Pope,
And I just wondered if that
only one Pope since the 14th, 15th century has not died in office. Only one Pope has retired since, well, 500 years. And that was fairly recently. So the general expectation always was the Pope would die in office, that he wouldn't have any retirement, he'd work as Pope to his death. But that's now been revised a little bit.
But how old are you?
Very, very old. Well, you should remember when I was 70.
75. Are you 75?
No!
72.
When was my 70th birthday
I don't know.
Are you 75?
71. I will be 72 my next birthday, which is a way away. Okay. You haven't asked anything yet?
What age did you become a priest?
25 usually.
What is the minimum age?
Yeah. You need special permission to be ordained earlier than, I think 24 it is. But generally it's around about 25 that people are ordained. Because of the length of studies you've got to do beforehand. You can't be ordained without a fair bit of preparation, in other words. Why can't girls be priests? Well, a very good question. Because they never have been allowed to be priests. Ever, ever, ever. So far as we can tell from history, and because it's never happened,
Girls?
it's never likely to happen. Which might seem a bit strange, But priests in the Old Testament period, those who offered sacrifice in the temple, in the Jewish religion, were always men. Girls, women could not be priests in the ancient order. And when Jesus chose his 12 disciples, and we've got their names, none of them were girls, I'm afraid. And so the easiest answer is that it's never happened, and therefore it's never likely to happen. And part of the reason is because priests were always men in the ancient way. Sorry, girls. If it is to happen, I don't think it will be in my lifetime, but who knows? I just don't think it's likely. Sorry. Yes. Say again? How did I feel? Gosh, it's a long time ago to remember. I think I was quite excited by it all. It was a wonderful liturgical celebration. So lots of really good singing, lots of people there, a lot of priests there involved in the ordination. Yeah, sort of excited, and also I've been training such a long time, so that it was a sort of sense of achievement, I suppose, to have actually got there finally. And excitement, well, I had another year of study to do, and then to start work, which is what I really wanted to do. Because, believe it or not, you can study a bit too long. And you can get, tired of studying. Much as I enjoy studying, much as I have always studied, I've always kept reading, I've always been giving talks and lectures and things throughout my priesthood. But after 7 years, I was ready to do something else. So I was very happy to continue to study while I was doing the other work. Yes. My favourite, well, I mentioned helping people, particularly when they're having time of crisis. It's also wonderful to actually come into schools, and I'm now involved through the Multi-Academy Trust. It's not just St Bede's and St Bernard's that I'm involved with, it's also many of the other schools in Rotherham and Doncaster. So I do get out to see lots of people of primary school age at the moment, and it's lovely to work with them and spend time with them. That really is a definite plus of the job I've got at the moment.
Did you ever want to become a bishop?
No. When I was around about 40 years old, then if I'd been asked, I would almost certainly have said yes. By the time I was 50, I had decided I really did not want to be a bishop at all, ever. And that's a lot to do, I think, with my African experience. So between being 40 and 50, I was in Africa, working with very, very, very poor people in areas where there was lots of crime, lots of gangs, nasty people in gangs who would murder you without thinking about it, and doing all sorts of really difficult work, but among people who really had a deep love of God. In poverty and in awful social circumstances, they had a profound love of God. And that helped me to develop, I think, a spirit of service deeper than I'd had before. And I don't think that service goes with being a bishop, was the decision I came to. But working with the poor in different ways, and I continue to help with the poor through my work here, which I think is much more important. No wish to have high office in anything. Please.
How hard is it?
Some things are really hard. I mean, when Teddy died, that was really hard for all of us. But I had to, of course, see his parents, his grandparents. I was the priest at his funeral, and that's really tough. It's really hard dealing with people who are dying and who know they're going to die, and you have to try and help them through that experience. So there are really hard parts to it, but there's also a lot of happiness, a lot of joy. I also do baptisms, of course. I do weddings, and with people at times of great happiness. But there's also the other side to it, which is hard.
So as a human being then, as a human, what do you do if that all gets a bit too much? I mean, it's a horrendous amount to take on, and I would imagine it's quite an isolated solo role.
Yeah, you've got to be aware of your own needs. So the priests do suffer from burnout. Priests do have breakdowns. Priests can work themselves, to illness. So you've got to be aware, and you've got to balance your own life. So in dealing with really hard situations, you've got to be able to talk it through with other people. I've never actually had any counselling, but I talk with people. And one of the things I'm able to do is I'm able to preach. So a lot of times in the past when I've had hard situations to deal with, I talk about it in my preaching. And that's a helpful sort of therapy, I suppose. But all of us have got to be aware of the stresses and strains that we're under and be willing to do something about it and not just go under. Not just all get on top of us and then we can't cope. We've got to have strategies for coping in whatever circumstances in life we find ourselves. Excellent question, Mr. Sharp, but unusual coming from you. Yes. How long? The actual ordination itself was about an hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes, from start to finish. But lots of singing, lots of music, and yeah, big crowd of people, including the cathedral. Please.
If you were a rude priest, would you get kicked out of being a priest?
You can get kicked out from being a priest, yeah. If you got into trouble in any sort of way, I suppose. As a priest, you're supposed to be an example, a model for people. So, yeah, you've got to try and avoid, because you are an example to people. But if you did bad things, you would be thrown out, yeah.
I once knew a very rude priest who used to publicly, during Mass, almost itemise what people had paid in the collection and ask them to up it a bit. How rude is that? It's not a very good example, is it?
It's not something I would ever do. One of the things, when I was growing up, when I was your age, one of the things that happened in church every week was the priest would talk about money and the need for people to give more money. And this really, not annoyed me, angered me. And I resolved that if I was ever to be a priest, I would never talk about money. And I've nearly stuck to that. There are just times when, because of the circumstances in the parish, you've got to actually talk about money a little bit. But I don't, go on about money.
Isn't it a bit part alms giving anyway? Shouldn't we be encouraged to do that?
Yeah, but there's a difference between what I was brought up with was that sort of thing. Give more in the collection. We've got all these bills to pay. We've got this, that, and the other, and it was every week. And I don't think I'm not in the business of making money.
Not be a very good salesman.
I'd be an awful salesman.
Yeah.
I would always take no for an answer. Mr. Sharp, deviating as usual, talking about money, which is not something I want to talk about. Please.
So if you got ordained and then you became a priest, and then you went transgender into a woman, would you be like?
Oh yeah. One thing about Catholic priests is you don't get married, and so you don't have girlfriends. You can have friends who are girls, but you can't have girlfriends. Sorry, girls, I'm not available. And if you were in that situation, then you would be disciplined and you might be thrown out of the priesthood. So one of the things you've got to learn to cope with is having different sorts of friends. Everybody needs to have friends, everybody needs to have relationships, but there are some sorts of relationships as a Catholic priest I cannot have. And, 45 years on, I've managed pretty well, I hope.
How many people aren't get baptised?
Having fewer and fewer, I probably do about 20 baptisms a year, which in times past there would have been 4 or 5 times that amount. So it's fewer and fewer. And fewer weddings in church, I have to say as well. But plenty of funerals. One thing about people is that we all die.
What about if some of our young people who might not yet be Catholic? Is there a route for that? And do you get involved in that process?
Very much so. So if somebody wants to become a Catholic, then they go and see a priest, and there's a course of preparation. So you learn about the sort of things you learn about in RE, like the sacraments, like what happens in church, the Mass, how that works, the Bible, and all that's in the Bible, and how we should read the Bible, because you have to read it properly and understand what's behind it. So there's a course of instruction, and at the end of that, people would either be baptised if they've never been baptised before, or if they've been baptised in another Christian church, they'd be received into the Catholic Church and make their first Holy Communion and be confirmed. Confirmed and then make the first Holy Communion. Okay. Have I been kicked out of the priesthood? No. I'm still a priest.
And then at the church, do you know anything like me or something?
No, I'm happy to say that I've always been in good standing with the church. I may not get on with all the bishops all the time, but I've always been accepted as being a priest able to perform priestly duties. So I've never been suspended. I've never had any of that sort of trouble. I'm happy to say. Please.
Do you know how you said that there's would probably never be priests because they never
happened, yeah.
But girls were never allowed to play football, but they changed that.
That's true. There's slight difference in terms of the background to that. How awful is it that girls couldn't play football for such a long time, and the Football Association wouldn't allow them? So things do change, but I just think in this matter of priesthood, I just don't think it's likely. If you ask me why, I'm struggling. Yeah, Jesus didn't have any women in his disciples, but then women were very much second, third-rate citizens in the ancient world, and remain so up to fairly recent times. So things could change. I don't think it's likely, but it's a good example.
Do you ever get to a situation then where you get things thrown back at you? Because if the teaching is to almost look after the most needy or the lowest in society, do you ever get like intellects or whatever throwing things back at you to challenge you to say, well, surely Jesus should have hung around with more women then? If they were like with lepers or the starving or the sick.
Well, Jesus did go out to the poor, the marginalised, those on the edges of society, which included women. And if you go through the Gospels, Jesus had relationships with women. He spoke to the woman at the well in chapter 4 of John's Gospel. Women accompanied him on his journeys from Galilee to Jerusalem. And indeed, those women provided for Jesus and the disciples from their resources. So they paid for food, paid presumably for shelter, lodgings. So women were involved in his ministry. It's just that they weren't chosen to be disciples, which might have been a time-conditioned thing, but that's the sort of thing which is disputed by people in the church at the present time.
Yeah, but it's that dispute. See, what Father John is, although he comes across as a very friendly, very approachable, very hip and down with the kids, he's an intellect, a mind of great power and strength and depth.
What's he after?
No, but sometimes you see, I think where I struggle with things is you've got that level of knowledge, and that something can be proclaimed as your understanding, And yet somebody else could stand up of equal stature and say, well, my take on it is this.
That there is always room for scholarly dispute. So some people in the church would argue that women were deacons in the early church, and that should at least be open to them. Remember, that's the first level of priesthood. That should be open to them today. And others would say, well, no, they were, the title deacon might have been used, but it wasn't in the same way as we talk about deacons today. It was a ministry of service, you could say that Mr. Sharp's mum, who is very frequently down at St. Bede's, helping me, she has a ministry of service, but she's not a deacon in the modern sense. So this is all open to dispute. But the final decision as to what is with basically with the Pope.
Girls can be altar servers, can't they?
Girls can now. When I was 7, I began to be an altar server, as my 2 elder brothers had been before me and were with me, for which I had to learn how to speak Latin. Anybody know what Latin is?
Isn't all languages have every country to
Well, not every country, but it was the ancient language of Rome. So Romans, who ruled much of the world at the time of Jesus, they spoke Latin. Most of them would also actually know Greek as well, because that was the language of culture. But at the age of 7, I had to be able to speak Latin, though I didn't need to know what it meant. How odd is that? So when the priest began Mass in those long ago times, he began with the sign of the cross, but not in the name of the Father and of the Son. He said, in nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, to which we replied, Amen. Although that's not a Latin word, and it's not a Greek word, it is, as I told you before, a word in the language of Jesus, which is not English. Jesus spoke what language? Well, the language he spoke was called Aramaic, which was a sort of Hebrew, but the word Amen is Aramaic. It comes at the end of many phrases in Greek and Latin, and indeed in English. But then the priest would continue in tribo ad altare Dei, to which I, or the server, would respond, Adem qualificat juventutem mei. That means I will go to the altar of God and I reply, the God who brings joy to my youth. That is a psalm from the book of Psalms in the Old Testament, and that's how Mass used to begin. And I had to know all the replies in Latin without actually knowing what they meant. That's the way it worked. But girls were not allowed to be altar servers. And indeed, girls only began to be allowed to be altar servers in 1984, 1985, that sort of time. Before that, they were not. Where would we be without girls servants these days? Well, perhaps we would be nowhere. But so that's an interesting change. You're talking about change and then footballers. It might be that I'm completely wrong, because people do have different opinions, and that we will have women priests in the Catholic Church. My suspicion is that we won't, but times do change. Thinking changes.
You know Jesus, God is his Father.
Yep.
So doesn't that mean Jesus could speak every single language?
No, it doesn't. It's a very interesting point, though. Some people think that because Jesus was God, Son of God, that he must have known everything there was to know in the whole world. The thing is, though, he was also true man. And no human being knows everything there is to know in the whole world. Mr. Sharp, Gavin knows an awful lot, but he doesn't know everything. I know a lot about different things, but I certainly don't know everything. So if he was truly man, truly human, like us, He can't have done everything. And so there is dispute as to what he would have known and what he couldn't have known, and whether he could have had a conversation about nuclear physics in the first century of the Common Era. To which the answer, I think, has to be no, he couldn't have spoken about nuclear physics because he was a man limited by his being a man at that time. But how does that square with him being God? A fascinating question, which people still ponder over and will till the end of time.
So if you didn't know everything, how do you know that Judas betrayed him?
Well, he was very perceptive. I think we've got to understand that Jesus wasn't a dummy in any sort of way. And he especially knew people. And he could read people and know what they were thinking at times, which some people are really, really good at. And so he knew what sort of person Judas was, and knew that his desire for money, perhaps, that's what Matthew suggests, would make him betray his Lord, his Master. He also knew that Peter was a loud man, but we'd all known that if we knew Peter. But he was perceptive. And it's almost certain that he would have known, because of his knowledge of people, what was going to happen to him when he went to Jerusalem. So that's not a sort of absolute certain knowledge, but some people, can tell, in a sense, tell the future because of the way they can read situations and read people. So I think Jesus was very perceptive, but I don't think he knew everything there was to know in the whole world. He wouldn't have been able to have a conversation with Einstein, because Einstein didn't live until a lot later. So he was limited in what he could know, because he was like us in all things. No, lots of churches and different religious groups have people in higher positions, so leaders. In the Catholic Church, it happens to be priests who have to be men. In other religions, in other denominations, it can be women, but most such organisations would have some sort of leadership. With the Catholic Church, it's just men. No, we'll go to you first. Go on.
Do you know bishops? Are all of them men?
All bishops in the Catholic Church are men. Sorry.
Did Jesus have to?
I think he had insight. I think he had great perception. I think he had a great knowledge of human nature, but he didn't know all things. But there are examples in the Gospels where he seems to know things that he shouldn't really know. So he I think was a very good judge of character.
Father, I think we've got to nearly wrap it up because we've got to write down what we've learned and all things like that.
You mean you've got to work?
I think this hand has been at the...
Oh, sorry. I do apologise.
So,
What's the age limit to get baptised? Like, say if you're like 100 and you can't really like swim or anything because you can't really breathe. Like what would happen if you had to go underwater?
Well, no, we don't actually baptise very often by immersing somebody underwater. It happens in some Catholic churches, sometimes, but the way of baptism usually is by having a jug of some vessel containing water and a bowl, and you pour the water over the person's head 3 times, as you say, I baptise you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. And then the person is baptised. There are all sorts of ceremonies which go around that, but you can be baptised at any age. So if a baby has just been born and is very sick, the priest might well be called to baptise the baby who is just a few hours old. And you do that with a spoon and 3 drops of water. Somebody could be over 100 and want to become a Catholic, and they can be baptised at whatever age they are. So in a sense, there's no limit other than being alive. You don't baptise people who are dead.
Now, I think I've enjoyed that. I think there's been some really good questions there. I think genuine
Questions?
We'll make Ethan's the final question, but then I have just two very quick ones as well.
All right. Fine.
And then we'll.
How do they make the oil what they use?
The oil.
Also, I thought it was the ashes. How do they make those two?
How to make the oil? The oil is olive oil, so it's made from olives, which are pressed and go through a whole process. And then the oil is blessed by the bishop in the cathedral, usually in Holy Week. And there are three sorts of oils we use in the church, all of which are olive oil. But we mentioned chrism, which is used for baptisms, confirmations and ordinations. We have an oil which is also used for baptism, called the oil of baptism. And then we have the oil which is used for the anointing of the sick. So if somebody is very, very poorly, we have a ceremony which involves anointing of their forehead and hands with prayer to help to strengthen them and perhaps help them, we hope, to recover as well.
Is there any special?
So they are special oils because they're just olive oil, but they're special because they've been blessed in a special way by the bishop in a ceremony in the cathedral.
The different places use different kinds of oil.
No, in the Catholic Church, it's always olive oil that we use.
I meant different series, like different churches.
No, we get our oil from the cathedral, all being blessed by the bishop. So every diocese, every place which has a bishop, will have oil from their cathedral blessed by the bishop.
So what happens to the ash?
The ash, as in Ash Wednesday, gets put on people's foreheads, and then any ash that is left over will be washed into the ground. So it shouldn't be put down the sink, it should go into the earth. Probably should get. Okay,
Very good, thank you. We'll have to invite Father back. We ought to do this at once a term, really. My first question is not very fair. I just want your view on this, really. Do you think that the church should therefore modernise and get with the times of changes in society at the moment, or do you think what makes it so magical is its history and its tradition, and we should
well, I
stick
wouldn't want to use the word magical. Mystical,
no,
perhaps.
mystical, a slight slip.
The church has got to do two things. It's got to be true to its past. So you can't have things which are so new they've never happened before. But the church also has to always be in the process of reforming itself so that it speaks to people at their time. So the church now, in the 21st century, is both very different from the church of Jesus' time, 1st century, and the early church, 2nd century, but also it has to be the same in some important respects. So if, for instance, if Peter, the chief apostle, was suddenly to appear on earth, and he went down to St. Bede's and came in while I'm celebrating Mass, I hope he would know what I was doing. At an altar, with certain prayers, he'd have to have learnt the language or been given, an understanding of English, but I hope he would know what was going on because he would recognise it from occasions when he'd seen Jesus do this and when he himself had celebrated Mass. He wouldn't have called it Mass, that came a little bit later, but he would know what was happening. So there's a sense of sameness, but also a sense of change to talk to people of every age anew. So both things have got to be there.
I think what Father's saying is there is he'd like to set up a TikTok channel and he could evangelate that way. And then the last one, you can't...
Don't you have to be able to dance to do it?
No. You can't live in somewhere, especially if you're a cultured intellectual man like yourself, you can't live in somewhere like Rome for 7 years and not miss it perhaps, and if you do miss it, which bits do you particularly miss? Having never been...
I studied ancient history, and I studied Latin to A level. So Rome was very much a place where I felt familiar even as I got there the first time. But Rome is a fascinating place. It's the centre of Rome, the Centro Storico, around the Forum, the Colosseum, that part of it's very small, but that hasn't changed down the centuries. And one of the reasons it's not changed is partly because of the historical buildings, but also they have an organisation in Italy called the Belle Arti, the fine arts, the beautiful arts. And this is a government organisation, and they do not allow the exterior of buildings to be changed. So Rome, in a sense, doesn't change. What does change is behind the walls. So you can knock through a building and have a very modern office setup, but the outside looks like it did 200 or 300 years ago. Absolutely fascinating. But at the same time, there are places and little corners in Rome which in a sense haven't changed themselves. And Caravaggio would be familiar with these places in Rome, one of the great artists. But there's a whole atmosphere to it. There's just, when you've been in a place for such a long time, and walked the streets, and on the whole that's what you did, you walked everywhere. We were in the centre. English College is very close to the centre. Only about 20 minutes walk from the Vatican. But there's a whole atmosphere to it, which sort of just gets into your mind, into your brain, and into your fingers, into your feet. And it's that atmosphere of being there. And there's nothing better than walking down a Roman street with a pizza in your hand, which you just bought from a pizzeria, and munching it as you go. That's one of the great Roman experiences.
It's a little bit like having a pucker pie, New York stable.
Nothing
The
like that
atmosphere
at all.
tingling down the back.
But there is a sense to it. So I feel at home now in two places in the world, neither of which is in England. I feel completely at home in Rome, though I've not been back there for quite some time. And I feel completely at home in Cape Town, the Western Cape, a place I know very, very well. I've worked there for so long and I've been back so many times. But there I feel, when the plane lands, you get off the plane, I feel I've come home.
Can you put in for a transfer? Can you put in for a transfer? Have you got any say as a prick like that? Oh, I'd like to.
You
Or I
can
don't want
try.
that parish, I want that parish, or I
Well,
don't want
you
even
can't-
that diocese.
Well, these days we are open to negotiation, and bishops accept that. When I was first ordained, there would have been no negotiation about anything.
Right.
You were told, you are going there. This is what you will do.
But I suppose if that diocese had funded you through it, then you'd be a bit obligated.
Then you have at least a moral obligation. They can't actually charge you for what it cost them, but you are morally obliged to work for that bishop for a good number of years. But then guys do actually put in for transfers and go to other dioceses in England and Wales. And I, after all, worked for 10 years in South Africa. So these things can be done. But I remained a priest for this diocese.
And then a 30-year stint in Rotherham. Right, what do we say to Father?
Thank you for your brilliant questions.
And now, you see, although I've been saying he's an intellect and a very, very bright man, we'd love him in our quiz team.